and welcome. Again, I'm Amanda Moore and I'm with the Career Center. I'm one of our career coaches, and this is our alternate education panel. This is a really special event that I've always really enjoyed hosting because it's a fantastic way to encourage exploration and clarity on the idea of you can do more than the designated pathway as aligned with your major. We've got three fantastic panelists with us who represent a lot of different industries, and I will let them kind of speak to what their expertise is, what their background is in, but this is a casual conversation. So we'll probably get into some tips and tricks and encouragement also from them. So I encourage everybody to take those to heart, and maybe if you want to explore action steps, reach out to the Career Center. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off, and I will probably call on each one of our panelists, or if there's a natural, hey, I want to answer that one, feel free. Again, this is a conversation, so don't feel like you can't speak up if you don't want to. Let's start with Brandon. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell us, your name and your title and who you're representing, and then we'll get into some other background information after that.
Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Reed, and I am the Education and Development Manager for the National Museum of African American Music. I'm also a current graduate student at Middle Tennessee State University, pursuing my master's in public history with a concentration in museum management.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to kick it to Virginia.
How are you supposed to follow that? Hi, everybody. My name is Virginia. I work at ID Tech. We're a company that teaches kids how to code and other 21st century STEM skills. I'm a content specialist, so I do a lot of copy editing, writing, blogging, staying true to my roots. As a Peabody grad, I studied secondary education and English. Thank you for having me.
Stuck on mute. Now we've got Brian. Here we go.
That's okay, Amanda. I'm really good at lip reading. So hi, everybody. I'm Brian Dearman. I work with Curriculum Associates. I'm a talent specialist here with Curriculum Associates. We're an educational technology company based out of Massachusetts. I've been here for about 3 years, and we create curriculum for ELA and math to support over 8 million students nationwide for our products. So thank you for having us, and looking forward to chatting.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. And as you've probably noticed, we do have a lot of different industries that are maybe more education adjacent related represented. And I would think that it's a great place to start maybe. And I know Virginia already kind of mentioned starting with her education background, because we're going to kind of talk about maybe how you might not have thought this was your dream job when you were graduating or pursuing your major. So maybe Virginia, since you're our alumni on the panel, not to show favorite, but since you're our alumni on the panel, tell us a little bit about your education pathway and how it led to your career trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, when I graduated Peabody back in 2013, I went on to get a master's in curriculum and instruction from CU Boulder. And in my early years of teaching, I was, looking for side hustles because, I was working for a charter school, and I was really, excited to get my career started. And I think it's really important for, especially not young, but you all seem young to me, college students, to not limit yourselves possibility-wise. So I was always looking for summer opportunities, things I could do during the year, which is how I stumbled upon ID Tech. I started as a program director and would operate their summer programs at the University of Denver. And through that experience, I really became passionate about operating programs, managing teams, all skills, by the way, that teachers naturally develop, I think, as part of the demands of the profession. And that just sort of evolved. I fell in love with the company, and through building relationships with some really awesome mentors, came on board full time. I worked as a hiring manager before transitioning to my current role. And I really encourage all young and budding teachers to think about how leading a classroom of students, designing a differentiated curriculum, working with so many different stakeholders, those skills are valuable across so many industries. And I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to apply that in my professional journey, I suppose. And I would just really urge all kids studying education to, not just limit themselves to just the world of teaching or think that teaching skills only belong in the classroom.
I love that. I love starting with the side hustle and then exploring that. And we will kind of get into, I wrote down some notes because I think you hit on some really important pieces to the kind of evolution of exploring your career. So I really appreciate that. How about Brandon, you want to tell us a little bit about like what did you study, picking your major, and how you ended up in your really cool role as well?
So I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. I came to Nashville because of a music scholarship to Tennessee State University. I was an engineering major at first, and I know that's completely different. I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. And towards the end of my sophomore year, I started realizing I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And so then at that point, I started exploring different pathways. I've always loved reading. I've always loved writing. I consider being an English major. Ended up finding my way to history because of some really cool teachers and educators that I ended up having classes with. And then from there, I would say that I found my way towards the museum field itself, just based off of my conversation. Well, I would actually call him my mentor. He might not say that he's in that role, or in that capacity, but he's definitely been a mentor for me, Dr. Larotha Williams at Tennessee State. He learned that I was a history major. He took me to my first conference, and it was an African-American museum-based conference. And that's when I fell in love with the field. I fell in love with the culture and wanted to do my part to be able to join and give back. And that's when I decided to, join the museum field. And then from there, I think later we're going to be talking a little bit about our educational or our paths a little bit more, so I won't go too into detail, but I will say that a curator from NAMM, the museum, came and spoke to my class, his class actually, and I loved it. I loved everything about it because I've always loved music. I've always loved African-American history. Being able to do the two together was just a blessing. So as soon as he finished his lecture, I gave him a copy of my resume and said, I don't know how or when or however this is going to go, but I'm going to be an intern for you all. And so I kind of, chased that for a little bit and then started going to grad school as well, majoring in public history. So that's sort of my career path.
That's wild cool. You're not the only human who didn't know or maybe picked a major for the wrong reasons. I think outside of universities that have the support systems of you don't have to pick until your sophomore year. I changed my major 5 times. I tell my students that all the time before I found social work. And I actually got my master's from the University of Michigan. I've got a soft spot in my heart for Michigan and Michiganders. That's the only reason I'm surviving the snow right now.
Yes, definitely.
I love that. Well, thank you for sharing. And last but not least, Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about your pathway?
So there's some great parallels that I have with both Virginia and Brandon. So Brandon, was considering being an English major. I am one. So I went to University of New Hampshire, graduated in 2008. So Virginia as well. I was an English journalism major. So I thought when I was growing up that I wanted to be a reporter. That was my idea of sort of my career path. And I wanted to be, sort of a sports columnist. That was my idea. I got into the profession and realized within about a year that I hated it and I didn't like where it was going ultimately. And so my career path is very much a journey. As Virginia said, it's very much a journey. It's with a lot of winding roads and detours. I've done a lot of different things in my career path. I was an EMT for 10 plus years working in a hospital emergency room. I worked with community mental health supports. I was a crisis counselor in Massachusetts, as well as an in-home therapist for kids with behavioral issues ranging from 2 to 20 in Massachusetts. Ended up getting burnt out really quickly in that career, as I'm sure you can imagine. And then sort of moved on to back towards my roots. I worked for an educational contractor, doing some editorial proofreading things, doing some graphic design for a lot of educational materials, kind of similar to what we do here at Curriculum Associates. And I came to a point in my career where I thought that it wasn't so much about that I was focusing too much necessarily on specific jobs and not so much on what I really wanted to do with the rest of my life and finding an organization or a mission or values that ultimately really aligned with what mine were. I considered in college being a teacher. And so, one of the great things that I'm forever grateful to Curriculum Associates for is they looked at somebody with my non-traditional career path and saw these different elements that they could pull into a career, for me being a curriculum associate. So I started in 2018 as a candidate experience coordinator, worked my way up to being a recruiter, which I've been now for the past 3+ years, and absolutely love it. Wouldn't change it for the world. So I would encourage students to to not come out of college thinking that the first job that you get is going to be the end all be all. It's not necessarily, it's not the normal experience or the traditional experience that most students, I think, really ultimately experience. And so for us, it's really just embracing that, sort of learning, trying different things, being open to try new things, being open to learn new things is ultimately going to benefit your career path down the road.
Yeah, and the data backs you up for sure. The first job you take isn't always necessarily the job for life. I mean, I love seeing the parallels and the connections of you taking advantage of mentors, you taking, maybe throwing in that side hustle or throwing in that hustle after a class and sharing your resume. Like it just takes maybe a little bit of being uncomfortable, but also like leaning into that uncomfortable moment. And I really love I hated it because sometimes learning what you don't like is how you figure out what you like. So those are all, I think, very relatable pieces that our students can navigate and maybe learn from. And the learning piece kind of points to my next question, which is like, what would you identify as like your key challenges or your key rewards? Like we can learn from positive and from negative. So something that like stands out, maybe as it's related to your career path or to your major. And I mean, anybody feel the urge to go first? I don't want to show, the same people over and over again first.
I can take this one. Just I would so welcome an opportunity to tell other future teachers this. I think we have at least one on the call. I think an early challenge as a young professional has got to be work-life balance, especially in the teaching profession. I'm really happy to see more conversations happening in the industry about, the demands on teachers and, walking back expectations to being reasonable and realistic. If I could tell myself this as a young, soon to be college grad, it would just be, start with the basics. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Really develop a routine and how you can manage your professional responsibilities so that you can do really well while also fighting the urge to take on more and more and more. Teacher burnout is a real thing, as is, I'm sure, comparable as it is in comparable fields. So I think a real challenge is going to be or has been, and might be for a young person, to just say, okay, this is the space that I'm taking for me. This is when I'm going to be focusing on my students. And those boundaries are perfectly healthy and perfectly fine, because by allowing yourself the space you need to do really great in your first year of teaching, you'll be better able to serve your students, which is really what it's all about. So that's my one little nugget.
I'd love to piggyback off that because I think there's a great point that you make, Virginia, that's, in terms of COVID-19, that's made the job of a teacher even that much harder, especially this past year. One thing that we've learned as an organization is we can create the best product in the world that ultimately benefits teachers and students. But if there's no accessibility and the focus piece, a lot of remote learning and things like that, the teachers are facing a bigger struggle than they ever have in terms of attention span and sort of reaching students in the way that they can. So that work-life balance is super important. I would also encourage that if you, as you're looking at classes, especially, and you look at sort of your electives or the ones that you don't necessarily have to take towards your major, try to broaden your horizons would be my best piece of advice there. I think I wouldn't have been able to find my way into the career path that I found now if I didn't take things that sort of pushed my boundaries, didn't take things that I wasn't familiar with, but I was interested in learning more about. I think those are ways that you can expand. I mean, my minor was political science. When you think of political science and English journalism, they're not exactly parallel. And so I think that there are elements of things that I pulled from my major, my minor, and a lot of the electives that I did that really branched out that I think ultimately, as you get further down your career path, you get later on in your professional career, are going to help the idea of what you really want to do crystallize.
That's awesome. I love both of those answers. Just to kind of build on that, I think one thing that I've struggled with in the past, especially early on in my career, that I'm still, getting to improve now is managing expectations. And that doesn't mean for, my supervisor, but also for myself and what I expect for myself. A lot of students, traditional students now have to have a job and be in school. So me being in grad school and working at the museum, an up and coming museum, has been so tough, but it's also been a blessing because I've gotten a chance to, combine the theory with the practical work of, building and running a museum. So managing expectations is a really big thing. Understand that, especially sort of in the environment that we're in right now with COVID-19, every step that you take every day is important, and it's a step towards your future. So, the one thing I'm working on right now for MTSU, the MTSU school side of things, is I'm on the final part of my thesis. And so working on that, I don't get to necessarily do it every day because I'm still kind of doing my regular work with the museum. And then we've transitioned to doing a lot of virtual programming. So that's a huge portion of my day as well, along with grant writing. So one thing I've had to come to terms with is understanding that, you may not always be able to approach the task how you intended, but as long as you're continuing to make progress, it's just you need to be able to appreciate and, or force yourself to appreciate what you're doing and appreciate where you are in your life and appreciate that you'll get to where you want to be.
I mean, that's some wise advice from some like full adults, if I ever heard any. Very relatable, boundaries in all things, especially as a career coach, teaching students that it's one thing to say it, but to have like other humans or people out in the real world reiterate that, and the managing expectations and like encouraging, like layering the intersections of your interests. Really, really great advice from probably learning in aches and pains what you don't like and what you do like. But I appreciate that kind of transparency. We're going to shift more from like getting to know you guys and gals, which has been really fun. And I hope that we can continue that even into these conversations, but more related to major. Because the students on this call, because the panel is called Alternate Education, panel to encourage exploration. With the diversity of the industries that you represent, from museums, curriculum, tech, even STEM tech, and even if they are very indirectly / directly related to education, I'm curious to hear what you've seen, even in your story, but beyond that, as maybe a hiring manager, as a peer, historically, what other teachers or education majors do you see in your organization? What roles do they take on? And anybody can share, or do you want me to keep calling on people?
I'm happy to kick this one off.
Let's go, yeah.
So, I mean, and Virginia mentioned this earlier, and sort of, students who may reach out and say, I've had many college students reach out to me and say this, that they've already identified that they don't necessarily want to be a teacher, but they want to have some type of impact in education. And it's really a vast array of different ways that folks can do that. For our organization, we create our products from start to finish. It's K through 8, so it's a lot of platform building. So even folks who have education passions, who are in sort of the IT or graphic design fields, can find work here at Curriculum Associates. There's curriculum development. There's also, we have included in our e-learning platform an assessment tool. So we hire a lot of psychometricians and folks who will do the data and understand what the data actually means and how to interpret it. We also will hire a lot of learning and development specialists who aren't focused in the teaching aspect, but sort of how students learn. One of our goals in our organization has been to create an equitable learning experience for every student, regardless of background or socioeconomic conditions, whatever it may be. We want to make sure that the learning experience is equitable. So, putting in the research and understanding how students learn and how to best reach them and what tools you can utilize in order to get them to either grade level proficiency or well beyond. There's a host of different things, especially at Curriculum Associates, where students can really have that opportunity. And we do have opportunities that are really geared towards soon-to-be college graduates that I think are fantastic. We have our Management Development Associate program, which is it's a 3-year rotational program. You get the opportunity to work on 5 or 6 different teams, learn. So this is a great opportunity for those who don't quite know what they want to do in education, but know it's not specifically teaching. You get that hands-on experience. You get to try these different things over 3 years. And by the end of the program, you get an opportunity to pick which team you want to be on. Things like that, I think, are great opportunities for especially soon-to-be college graduates to work for a company, at least in the ed tech field like CA.
That's a lot. That's really cool. I'm encouraged to hear from like the rotational piece to like the very directly related, like, hey, a lot of education students are even just passionate about education platforms or initiatives, might have some overlapping skills, like Virginia mentioned earlier, like curriculum development. They've already learned how to do this, but implementing it in a different way. So that's really empowering. Brandon or Virginia, have you seen other education, maybe passionate humans, as Brian called it, or maybe trained students within or graduates within your organization?
Well, I'll jump in really quickly. I'll say the mission of NAMM is to educate the world, preserve the legacy, and celebrate the central role African Americans play in creating the American soundtrack. Education is at the fore of what we do, and you'll see that that's very similar for a lot of museums. So education majors are of tremendous value and play a super important role in the work that museums do. I'm a part of the education team. So what that means is on the day-to-day, I'm facilitating youth programs. I'm doing teacher training workshops. Right now, on the adult education side of things, I'm working on our 4th annual Rivers of Rhythm Institute for Social Education. It's a teacher training workshop to really make sure that all of the teachers in Metro Nashville are equipped with those tools they need to be able to teach African American history. So education majors play a really, really important role in the museum field, especially from the perspective of trying to facilitate programs that allow students to see themselves within history. What we like to call is culturally inclusive programming. It's so big right now, especially with everything going on with social justice as well.
Thank you. That's awesome. Virginia, yeah.
I really wish I could take my former students to your museum, Brandon.
Yeah.
So cool. Teachers can do anything. I firmly believe that. And I think the best thing that a education studies, COG studies major can do is seek out opportunities so that on your resume, you can show that you can do anything. Because within the teaching world, things like differentiation or classroom management or working with the rest of your grade level, maybe to develop a unit plan. We have that sort of teacher speak, but by making it understandable to someone outside the field, you'd really be amazed, I think, at how many doors that can open. And I think that, if I could do one thing for the working world, I would love to rebrand the term soft skills, because I really think that those are only soft as long as you don't have anything to back up when you say you're, I don't know, flexible or empathetic, or I think you even listed a few, Amanda. And as Vanderbilt students, I really think that, students have so many opportunities to start building the receipts. Is that what the kids say these days? Have the evidence to say, I was flexible because I planned this alternative spring break trip. I showed empathy by designing this culturally inclusive unit plan with my mentor teacher that went really well, and I got this feedback on it. And really lean into those opportunities, because when you leave school, having just a diverse portfolio of showing what you can do will open the doors, I think, to getting a great teaching job, but also being able to find another career path if that's what students are more interested in.
And we'll probably move to that next question because I really want to get into that. And I think that's all really great to see, like, who is moving in your office, who is making impact in your office, which that's what, to a degree, educators or helpers or care, like there's an impact piece. And that there is this unfortunate conversation around soft skills because they're harder to at least measure. So in that question that I put for the panelists was, how can students highlight those kind of soft skills like empathy? So as a career coach, just to give you an example, a great way, and you, Virginia, walked through it beautifully already to a degree, was, evidencing that. You can't just tell someone I'm empathetic because, that's subjective. But where can we teach students to highlight these things? How can we teach them to talk about these things? Or what kind of language, when you want to see us, and how have you seen us be successful either in your own track or in your peers, translating that teacher talk or that education talk or even those soft skills? Where have you seen how students can highlight those skills? Any examples from your own personal lives?
Yeah, so my career chapter before this one, I did probably around 300 interviews, looked at a bunch of resumes. It was very central to my role. And I think that aside from actually doing the things you list on your resume and having that as a way to specify what that means when you apply for jobs, ask for feedback, especially as a young person. Brandon, you mentioned sending along your resume, go above and beyond to make connections with people. And your first boss, second boss, you'd be amazed at how pivotal those individuals can be in shaping your career path. Go to office hours, ask for your mentor teachers, buy them a coffee and ask them to look over your lesson plans and get that feedback. I also recommend, because I think that it's, when you're a junior in college, you might feel nervous about doing that. Oh, I don't want to take their time. Oh, I'm scared to hear what they really think of me. The benefits I think that you can get out of, getting that encouragement and those suggestions early on far outweigh the drawbacks of feeling a little awkward. So that would be my first piece in taking steps to highlight those skills. Because when I saw a resume that said, I'm trying to think back to a specific one. We hired a lot of computer science students, and some students would write hosts, young women in STEM club. Great. What does that mean? But then I'd see a resume that said host women in STEM club, partnering with professor and local middle school to teach, Scratch classes. So get those specifics, and then have bonus. You have someone who I'm sure be happy to be a reference for you when you do end up getting that call back for an interview.
So good. And it's going beyond that, just listing what you did, but getting to the meat of it, like that context, the how, the why this is important, who did you do it with, and even sometimes into that result. You can do that with, increase awareness of, the intersections of this, and this. Like, it doesn't have to be a number or a percentage. So I really appreciate that. To add on that, not just feedback when you're working with them in this positive setting, but I usually tell students to ask for feedback if they have an interview and they don't get the job. Like, what could I have done differently to, set myself apart? Or what did you see lacking in my resume? So feedback is, it might be uncomfortable, but like Brene Brown likes to say, lean into the uncomfortable, right? Any other kind of suggestions of how you've seen in your role, maybe as a hiring person or a part of a team, how people highlight those softer skills from Brian or Brandon?
No, I think Virginia, she got it. Be uncomfortable. No one ever grew by, trying to stay comfortable at every single point in their life. I know for myself coming out of college, it was hard trying to find, my place, especially within the field. I mentioned earlier that I met the curator. He came to my classroom and spoke. He actually left the organization maybe a year after that, so I ended up losing my contact. Mm-hmm. And I remember I applied for a job somewhere else in Tennessee, and while I didn't get it, the hiring manager was so impressed by the way that I spoke about myself and about my skills that they started asking me, well, you're not maybe a good fit for this position, but where else are you applying? What else are you looking for? And they had a connection to the museum and were able to kind of push me in the right direction for there. So being able to talk about yourself is a really big thing. Understanding that every no isn't just a no. It's also something that you can use to sort of push you in that right direction. It's such a huge thing, at least for me.
That's so good. And we're hearing, Brian, did you have anything to add there? Or?
Yeah, I think that Virginia and Brandon both hit the nail on the head, and Brandon made I thought the example that Brandon shared at the beginning was fantastic, where he attended a lecture, really engaged with the presenter and decided, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to shoot my shot here, and I'm going to give my resume to this person, and maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but at least you've done the work. I think that's one thing to emphasize. I also should mention this because I think my team at CA would get very angry if I don't. There's a motto that goes around the talent team at CA, and that's feedback is a gift. Which isn't always, I think at times, as long as it's constructive, I think it's most definitely a gift. You can always learn something from it. It's sort of redefining failure to a point. If you take a shot at something and you ultimately miss, and as Brandon said, it's not a no, it's a no with some elaboration. You can learn something from it. And if you take something from it, it's not necessarily a failure. It's something that you can ultimately learn from. And I think it's also helpful, as Virginia mentioned, to drill down on a lot of those quote unquote soft skills that you read about. Ultimately, I see a ton of applications that come in across my desk that have, I'm flexible, I'm a self-starter, I'm organized, but there's no demonstration of how you do that. And, I think it might be a confidence issue, to be quite honest and transparent. I think that there's probably some students who are saying, I think this demonstrates flexibility, but is the hiring manager looking at my resume thinking the same thing?
Yeah.
And it's a matter of, that confidence. You're going to learn from it no matter what, I think, ultimately. So you really just want to have some confidence in yourself to tell the story, because you don't know what hiring manager is going to look at it and say, it's not exactly the most traditional background, but I can see where the skills align with what we're looking for here. And that's an opportunity.
I mean, this is a really great dialogue. I know we're going to jump around a little bit, but to speak to, we don't want to invalidate feeling uncomfortable. We want to validate that you probably will, but that's okay. Embrace it, lean into it, because like our panelists have told us, like, it's worth it in the end. Even if it's a learning, even if it's a no, you're going to learn from it. And the more you do it, then probably the easier it'll become. But even as a career professional myself, sometimes I get uncomfortable reaching out to strangers, and I'm an extreme extrovert. So I don't want to invalidate. In fact, I think we're all kind of naming that it probably will suck a little bit, but that's okay. So I appreciate that feedback. And I want to pivot to another question about something you all have indirectly or maybe directly hit on, which is, can you speak to the value of networking, the benefit it plays in the application process, really the benefit it plays in your entire professional development? All of you have really spoke, and we'll follow this up with the mentor conversation. But I think networking is this big scary word, but in the end, it is conversations. It's what we're doing today to a degree. But from your own experiences, can you speak a little bit to that value? Anyone can go.
Sure, I can kick it off. So with networking, I would say it's certainly a benefit. It's something that, and I know it can be absolutely scary to sort of approach a stranger sort of out of the blue and say, hey, will you take a look at my resume? Or hey, will you tell me about this potential job? People are more willing to converse with you than you realize. I think that's the first thing I would say. But networking is important because you can learn more. Ultimately, you have partnerships that you want to explore. And as I mentioned sort of earlier on, for me, it's not so much about focusing on a job title or a specific role. It's about finding either a career path, a career area, or even an organization that I can align with at sort of a mission level. And that ultimately is doing work that I'm passionate about, that I can align with. So I'd start there. But you can learn more about an organization by just LinkedIn, pinging somebody on LinkedIn and just reaching out and saying, I'd love to learn more about CA. I've been looking at potential opportunities, or whatever organization it might be. I think that's a helpful benefit. I would also say on the caution that I would caution against using networking as your primary source. I think for our organization, we've made the pledge in the last year that we're going to be an anti-racist organization. It's something that we've made strides towards. We're never going to be perfect at it. And I think that mentality puts us in a position where we're going to constantly be working at it to get better and better and better as each year passes. But I think traditional networking avenues tend to lead to more restrictive candidate pools. And so you can ultimately limit yourself if you really focus specifically on networking, whereas it's about doing the homework too. Really, if there's a specific company you're interviewing with, or a specific company you want to work for, do your homework on that company. Find out what they're doing. Find out what products they offer. Do your homework, because the hiring managers, if you ultimately get an interview, are going to reach out to you and really test your knowledge on this. And if you have shown that you've done the work, you've done your homework, that's going to be a step in the right direction. So I would say overall, networking is a great benefit. You can learn a lot. You can create relationships that can lead to things down the road. I just wouldn't focus on it as the primary method in terms of career search as you go forward.
Brian, I could not agree more.
No, please go ahead.
When I was hiring and going to dozens of events every year, the candidates who impressed me the most were those who had done their homework and had specific questions about the organization, about the mission, or if there was a specific position available, about the job. I think the second you start interacting with someone, it's kind of like an interview in that stage of the job search. I think Brian hit the nail on the head in that networking is a tool in your toolbox. It shouldn't be the only means with which you're conducting your job search. But the biggest favor you can do yourself is a lot of homework. Shouldn't have to tell a lot of teachers that, but you'd be surprised how much of a difference it can really make. Remember the name of the person that you talk to, follow up, and come with specific questions that show that you care about the organization as much as they do. Because look at us. We love talking about what we do. We love, talking about the organizations that we work for. So I think, it's going to be uncomfortable to what you were saying, Amanda. Pick a Netflix show you'll watch at the end of the day, something you'll do to decompress and just really go for it and make sure that you're prepared. Especially if you get to an interview process, the questions you ask, I think, are a great opportunity to show them who you are as you're learning about the organization. Glassdoor is a great place to get a source for those questions and learn about organizations, websites, talk to people, do your homework.
It's probably the most important homework you'll do. That's what I always tell my students. I appreciate the dialogue of not just networking. In fact, a lot of data supports, I think, that traditional idea of networking. It's about who you know. And, I grew up, my mom was a teacher. My dad ran a family business in Podunk, Alabama. I didn't know anybody. So the idea of network's a little scary. So we have found, research now shows, students who are willing to do that homework and reach out with a cold contact or someone they don't know, that there is more, it's 70% more likely to get a job if you're doing that homework and you're doing that little hustle, as opposed to the warm contacts, which is kind of that good old boy traditional layout of it. So the doing the homework and like pursuing it formula, I think, is a really great dialogue. Brandon, did you have anything to add as far as networking?
I mean, Virginia and Brian just completely covered it. I'll try and add just a little bit though. Networking is important. I mean, we've already touched upon that. I recall the time I went to a conference in Virginia. It was the Association of African American Museums. This is my first big conference. This is my first time being on my own. And I really just wanted to kind of keep to myself. But I had this one guy who he can kind of pick out the people who are new to the field and the people who are new to the conference. And he stuck with me the entire time. Every time I would go to a new session, he would introduce me to everyone in the room. Every time I would, when I would go to lunch or go to, anything that was going on, or when, the gatherings they would have or the networking events, he would make sure that I knew everyone there and that they knew me. And so that kind of brings me to the point of something that I learned. I was sitting on some live streams sometime last year about networking and sort of how to navigate that. And the presenter said that you have mentors and you have investors. And you need to be able to tell the difference between the two. And sometimes the mentor can be the investor, but that's not always the case. The mentor is someone who you hand them their resume, they'll look it over and they'll tell you exactly how to get into that space, how to navigate it, and what exactly to expect. You have the investor. The investor is the person who will take that resume and take it and walk it into the hiring manager and say, this is the person you need to hire. That's the person who will talk about you and talk you up when you're not in the room. And so that's something that's been very big for me as far as networking, being able to understand that I need to have that, I need to be able to build a network of mentors, but also have those investors as well. The people who I say, I'm interested in this opportunity, and they'll be able to speak to me and speak to what I want to do when I'm not in the room as well. So networking is just so important. It's scary. It's something that you just have to be comfortable with. And the only way to be comfortable with it is to be able to do it and just to continue to do it.
So true. I really love that unpacking of the different kind of relationships you can build out of networking. I'm going to steal that a little bit, I think. I might have to reach out to you to know who to cite the source for, but I love that. We're going to move into it really is flowing. You panelists are just fantastic, all building off of each other, but also leading right into my questions. I think a handful of you have mentioned your mentor. How did you find that person? Or how'd you get connected? How do you stay connected? What's the biggest impact that the mentor? And I mean, obviously, after hearing what Brandon said about investors, if you've identified those humans in your life, who's your cheerleader? Who's your advocate to a degree? Any stories, any kind of mentor stories, how you found those people? I think Brandon's so true, that they might not identify themselves as a mentor, but you go to them. I have a lot of those.
I would say the one that comes to, sorry, Virginia, would you like to go? My apologies. No.
I was just sort of panic unmuting. You go ahead.
It's the nature of Zoom. We don't know when to go.
This is true. I would say that she would not identify herself as a mentor, but mine, under normal circumstances, when we're not in a pandemic and working in the office, mine's about 2 doors down from my desk. And that's my manager, who is really fantastic about really her investment in her professionals that work under her, but also her investment in humans that work under her. It's not just about, and she said this multiple times, and I have to give her credit for it because I think that attitude is so rare, is that she comes with the approach of, I can develop you as a professional, but if I develop you as a professional and develop you as a person long term, ultimately it's going to have a much bigger impact. And so she's always said that if you take some of the lessons and things that I've taught you and go somewhere else with it, so long as you have success, I'm going to be proud of you, and not necessarily sort of kicking ourselves that we let you walk out the door. So I think that that's been a benefit, and the amount of time and investment to be able to not only care about people on a professional level and want to help them sort of grow, but to care about people on a personal level is always something I've gravitated towards. So that's something that stuck with me.
You know, I've been blessed to have mentors come to me rather than having to seek them out. And I've had mentors at, many different levels. When I was applying for colleges, my aunt, who was the admissions coordinator / recruiter for University of Michigan, she was my mentor. She critiqued and reviewed every single one of my resumes, every single one of my interest letters, my applications, everything. When I was at TSU, Dr. LaRotha Williams was my mentor, the one who first introduced me to the field. I would say when I left TSU, when I was thinking of going into higher education as a career path, I was a drum major at TSU as well in the aristocrat bands. One of the former drum majors reached out to me and was trying to help me with things of that nature as well. I would say now my mentor is my supervisor at the museum. And she's gone above and beyond. And this is where I was talking about, you have mentors and investors, and sometimes they can be the same. She has been both for me. The relationship is, she leads the department, but she also understands where I'm coming from. She listens to everything that I have to say and gives me opportunity to grow. So she's always constantly saying, Brandon, you're doing great from the background, but you need to get in front of the camera as well. You need to get more speaking experience. You need to do this as well. This might be helpful for you. You should look at this degree next. So she's been very helpful for me.
I think part of the reason this sort of piggybacks on what you were saying, Brandon. One of the reasons I was hesitant to jump in is the mentor that stuck out in my head at first. We did not get along at first. And so, just putting it out there, you will have the opportunity to learn from people who push you and who challenge you. And it's important to lean into those as much as when you find someone who's really your cheerleader. He was the first supervisor I had at ID Tech. I was operating a summer program, and he had really high standards. And at the time I thought I knew it all. So I have a master's in teaching. I'm coming in to run this program. And he really showed me that this isn't school. The environment that we're striving to create is more like a startup, which I didn't have experience with. I definitely didn't handle this perfectly at the time, but looking back, I'm so glad that I met him, because eventually he did become a huge investor, to borrow that term, in me. And just remember that I'd urge folks to remember that mentorship is a two-way street. I got to understand what made him tick. I remember so vividly, he said, congratulations, Virginia, your program is the second highest rated in the region this week. And of course, I'm sitting there like, well, what's number one doing? What practices can we implement to, be more like whatever the highest standard is? So don't be shy with those questions. But also, I learned to sort of take your cues and really listen a lot. Because I'm an inquisitive person, but I would write down a list of questions and say, okay, Virginia, these two are the most important. Let's be respectful of their time. Like, let's focus on what is going to be a priority for you, and also something that they really care about. Because in the fullness of time, you should try to learn from as much as you can and gather those resources, because you don't want to tank a relationship by making a mentor sort of your go-to person when there are certain things you can figure out on your own. So I guess that's my one word of caution in approaching those mentor relationships.
Can I jump in right there, Amanda? Just add in one thing too. I think Virginia makes a great point. I also think that one thing that is a misconception, especially among sort of younger professionals, is asking for help is a sign of weakness. And it's really not. And I think that that's one thing to certainly encourage. If you are hungry and inquisitive and want to learn, ask as many questions as humanly possible to learn as much as you can. Because if you don't take advantage of those things, those opportunities may not be there the next time that you go back. So don't look at it as a sign of weakness. If you're asking for help, it just shows that you want to learn and that you're hungry to learn.
That's a really great perspective. I identify with that as a student. When I was a student, I was told I had all the tools I needed to be successful. And I was like, oh, no, I do not. But like literally our job in the Career Center, we're not a required resource, but our job is to tell students it's okay to ask for help. We're the experts. Like we do this, you don't have to. Like there are people who are paid to know this stuff. So I definitely echo that. I think a lot of student support services are there to validate that it's okay to ask for help. But there is imposter syndrome that is also circled around that, like identifying weakness or needing help. But it definitely is this like soft, sensitive spot that I think a lot of people, it's a growing moment, right? Which maybe they'll get through mentorship or through hearing from really great panelists who tell them it's okay to ask for help. We don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to shift to like two kind of advice pieces. And then maybe if any of the students want to shoot me a question in the chat, feel free to do that now, students. What would be your biggest piece of advice when it comes to job or internship search? Outside, especially like with my education students or my social sciences, I think that I don't want to like cluster everybody or speak for everybody, but a lot of them, the common conversation is, I don't want to work at a camp. I don't want to work at this. I don't want to work in a classroom. What would be like your pieces of advice to explore or to engage in the job search differently?
I think but some of my biggest, tips and tricks I've touched on. So just really quickly, do your homework, target specific organizations that you're interested in, and come prepared with informed questions. Network along with the other tools in your toolbox. One thing I did is I printed out like 10 most commonly asked interview questions, and you can pick a field, whether it's teaching or engineering or whatever it is, and practice answering them, not only for your interview search, but it'll also help clarify the kind of job that you want. So I think that that's a very worthwhile exercise. And get 2 people to look at your resume.
At least. That's great advice. I love my dad always told me if somebody repeats something, it's because they want you to get it. So I love a good, this is really what I meant.
Really do that.
But just to kind of get maybe a little bit more specific, how would you encourage a student to identify a key target organization if there was a piece of advice around that?
Mm-hmm. Great question. It depends. Well, first, let's say, are we looking for a summer internship? Or are we looking for a part-time job? Are we looking for paid versus unpaid? There are a lot of great.
Focus on post-grad. Let's think about job.
Oh, sure. I think Indeed is a great resource, as is Glassdoor, to sort of cast a really wide net in your job search. Having identified a field, if you're applying for teaching jobs, I would recommend researching school districts really thoroughly. A lot of, recruiting events will happen on a specific local level, and don't rule out those charter schools. That's how I got my first job, is going to a charter specific event that I researched. So look for, of course, those will be all virtual nowadays, but really look for virtual career fairs. Come to things like this so that you can meet people and get a sense for what's out there, because starting with a Google search can be overwhelming and it might not even get you the best results. So I think job-specific websites, events like this, and looking in your community, sort of depending on where you want to be, areas that you're interested in, events that are specific to those locations.
Thank you.
Great question.
What about Brian or Brandon, or both?
I would say just familiarize yourself, and this kind of builds on everything we've been saying about asking questions, talking to your mentor, speaking with someone in the field. Familiarize yourself with the institution and where they normally, post jobs and everything of that nature. I know for museums, especially in sort of Tennessee Association of Museums, the Center for Nonprofit Management Nashville, Indeed, the American Association for State and Local History. Those are a lot of huge history-driven and history-driven and professional sites where a lot of museums and historical sites post their jobs. They have workshops, specifically catered towards historians and museum professionals. So just understanding sort of where in the field and in your geographic area or wherever you're looking, they typically like to post those jobs and what they're looking for and the skills and requirements and things of that nature.
Good.
I can chime in. I won't repeat the list that Virginia just ran off because I would echo every single one of them. But I would take it sort of a step further and sort of speaking from the recruiter lens, and when a resume crosses my desk, how to make yourself sort of stand out as you're trying to apply for roles. Well, the one thing I'd hammer home is attention to detail. Recruiters, that's the first thing that's going to ultimately disqualify candidates for a role is if and I've seen this dozens and dozens and dozens of times where you sort of have a form cover letter that you attach to every application. You may leave the one that you had just applied to the organization in there. We will catch it. And that attention to detail is never a good sign right to start. So you don't want to necessarily count yourself out before you've had a chance to really step in. So I would say that. I would also say when you look at writing your resume, I think it's a great point to have at least 2 people. I would say definitely more than 2 people, just to give you that different perspective. I would also look at the job descriptions that you're looking at and say, language-wise, how can you align your resume to that job description to make it more evident that you possess the skills or the background or whatever folks are looking for the position? I think that's a big one. So I would add that in as well. And I would add in one more point about if you're looking for different organizations. So if you're trying to target, not necessarily targeting the specific job, and not the job description, but looking at organizations. So I'll use myself as an example. When I was looking for a role, I wanted to be in education. I looked at education companies that were near me in the area and sort of worked my way around, and I found Curriculum Associates. And within 2 minutes, I immediately connected with the mission. I connected with the values. I wanted to be a part of what they were doing because I believed in it. And so when you can find that, I mean, it's so cliche to say that if you get up, if you love what you do every day when you go to work, it's not exactly work. To a point, you want to find something that you're passionate about because it makes it so much easier to get up every single day and do the work. So I would encourage to try to find things that you're passionate about. Try to find organizations with similar messages because I think it's going to be a good match when you are able to find it.
That's really great advice. I think we've already kind of hit on this, but we can close really with, and I think you're all gonna, apart from the Career Center, what would you say is like your advice for a resource or a tool that you use? Are you like a LinkedIn human? I know Virginia mentioned Glassdoor. I don't know, Virginia, are you familiar with the Fairy God Boss? Because that's a similar platform, very similar to Glassdoor, but it's for women by women. So, I'm all about that. But does anybody have a favorite, like shout out they want to give to a certain professional development resource they think students should check out?
I have 2 right off the top. Number one, LinkedIn Learning. If you have an opportunity to get on LinkedIn Learning, utilize that. The platform has so many different modules of different things you can learn, whether it's a software skill, whether it's a, as we call it, quote unquote, soft skills, different things that you can develop on. If it's public speaking, if it's interacting with other people, if it's working with your manager, there's all these different things that I think it makes it such a great library. The other thing, and Glassdoor is a great tool, so I'm glad we brought that up, but there are now other companies that are coming out with the option for people to review companies, but only if they still currently work for that company. So I know Glassdoor, I think it's worth adding in there that Glassdoor, you can get sometimes sort of that quote unquote scorned employee who had a bad experience who ultimately vents on Glassdoor as online for the world to see. There are other organizations so you can see what current employees are saying. Look for those too, because I think that perspective is certainly important as to what the morale is like. It's really gonna feed into what you understand about the culture.
I will just say LinkedIn is a huge thing for me. I've just now gotten more into using it and building my network. Send invitations, look for people who are within your field who are doing the same things as you, who you can also see sort of what they're doing, and then use that to sort of boost what you're doing as well. So I've just now started building up my LinkedIn profile and making sure that everything is great on there. One thing I started doing along with my putting my resume on there is I created a virtual portfolio. And that's something that anyone who comes across my LinkedIn page can go and see a little bit more detail about all the different projects I'm doing. And then you can, link different documents or videos or however you want to that as well. So LinkedIn is a huge platform that I like to use now.
Wonderful. Virginia, do you have any other that you want to highlight?
I hope this is relevant, but I recently became familiar with a platform called Catch a Fire. It connects nonprofit organizations with volunteers. And for students looking to boost their professional portfolio, if you have skills in copywriting, graphic design, anything like that, using that as an opportunity to practice applying for things, I think would be a really useful exercise, because, you know, it's just volunteer work, but you can get reviewed by a quote unquote employer. You can start building up those skills on your resume, and who knows, you might get connected with an organization that's actually hiring.
Yeah.
So if you have a little extra time, give it a try.
That's awesome. We're 1 minute over. So I just want to just speak gratitude for your time, for your dialogue, feeding off of each other, sharing your wisdom and your experiences, both personal and professional, that we're going to be able to share with our students.